Oh, hey everybody. It's Carter here in beautiful Vancouver, Canada. And I have finished up on the 1984 Canadian model RZ350, and I have moved on to the 1985 RZ500. We are doing a complete engine rebuild from the cranks up. And I decided to do this because I looked online trying to find a good video showing a rebuild of an RZ500 motor, and I can't find one. So I've decided to do a series of videos that will outline all the steps that I took to get this motor rebuilt. I asked my lovely wife Dawn if she'd like to join us and help out with the camera work. She said that she would rather be run over by the motorcycle than to help with a video about it. I think that's fine because she's easily replaced by this stand, which is way quieter and takes up less room. And I mean way less room. So anyways, here we are in the first stages, and I've already installed the transmission. And I've already polished up the cases. I'm not painting the lower cases on this one. I've simply cleaned them and took a polishing compound and just polished the paint back up and made it look quite new. I'm quite pleased with the results. And I've already put this transmission, removed it, inspected it, cleaned it, and put it back in. It's a very simple procedure with this transmission, which is why I didn't do a detailed video on it. The only suggestion I have is when you've got all of the transmission cover bolts out and your oil pump out, make sure that this sprocket stays on. That way the shaft will stay with the transmission housing when you pull it out. Otherwise, if it stays and the case comes, it's no longer a cassette transmission. You've just pulled and it's all just hanging there inside the lower case. So leave that sprocket on there and take it all out as one piece. There's no gasket between the transmission housing and the lower engine case. It's Yamaha bond only, or 3 bond, or Honda bond, or Suzuki bond, or Kawasaki bond. It's all the same stuff in different tubes with different labels. It's all 3M 3 bond. So that's what you need there rather than a gasket. It doesn't come with a gasket from the factory. It doesn't come, a gasket of course doesn't come with the kit. So we'll start off with the crankshafts. We're going to go over the crankshafts, and as you can see, I've got them both here. And I've gone over these crankshafts and inspected them. I've measured the web distance, crank distance, big end clearance, and also run out. And they are within specs in every aspect. The inner bearings feel fantastic. The motorcycle has 35,000 kilometers on it. The main problem with this motor was the seals. If you check this out, it's actually quite humorous. I'm lucky that that spring didn't end up in the crankshaft, but I have never seen seals this bad before. And I think it just could simply be the constant use that this motor went through, because this gentleman rode this across Canada. You can see one of that lip there, it just got folded right underneath. I don't know how that bearing on that crankshaft didn't blow. Anyways, I'm replacing that bearing. And speaking of bearings, if any of you are like, oh, you have to order genuine Yamaha bearings, it has to come in the genuine Yamaha box, that's a wives' tale, okay? Now, if you look at this bearing right here on this crankshaft that has never been out of this engine, you'll see, if you can see right there, the word Koyo. Same bearings that I got from Yambits, Koyo. Now the reason is because Yamaha doesn't make bearings. They source them from a bearing manufacturing company like Koyo. So this bearing is the exact same bearing from the exact same manufacturer that Yamaha used from the factory. So they don't have to come in a Yamaha box to be the exact same bearing. That is the bearing. So we're going to start off with crankshafts, and then we'll move over to the clutch. We'll do a complete clutch assembly, and complete with cover and water pump. And then from there, we'll move on to the electronics, my stator and rotor. And then from there, we'll move on to the motor installation. I'm going to put the motor in with the top end off so that I can do it by myself. And then we're going to do the top end, carburetors, and then of course the initial startup procedure, and all at the same time we're going to do the balance shaft mod. This is a 1985 RZ500, but it was built in the 11th month of 84, so it's an early 85, so it didn't have the balance shaft mod done from the factory, so I'm going to have to do it, which is the balance shaft is driven off the lower crank on the earlier models, and it caused vibration and some engine noise. So we're going to change over the gear on this end of the crank with that little flywheel so that the balance shaft will now be driven by the upper crank rather than the lower crank, as per Yamaha's measures report that they put out in 1985. You can find this online, and it's pretty easy to do. I saw another dude online doing it, but we'll go over it a little more extensively in the video. So for today, I'm going to end this video with everything that is driven off of the small gear on the back of the clutch basket. So, which is our oil pump, and which is our injector pump. So the way it works is your oil pump is going to go in here, bolted and driven by that gear. That gear is on a shaft that goes all the way through the motor and ends up here. This gear will mesh with the gear on the back of the clutch hub and drive the gear for the oil pump. This is for the transmission oil pump. After that, we will install this kickstart shaft. Because that, combined with this idler gear, are what drive the injector pump. This idler gear comes with 2 washers, one on either side, and a snap ring. I'm going to use just a little bit of assembly fluid in this copper bushing, just to give it a little bit of lubrication upon firing up. And we're going to mesh those 2 gears together. Install our snap ring with a good set of snap ring pliers. Don't buy cheap, shitty ones. They're a nightmare. You'll have snap rings snapping and popping all over the shop. So on goes our snap ring. And now this is driven by the small gear on the back of the clutch hub. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to, before we install this pump, we're going to take the top of it off and make sure it's clean, and clean out the sump screen, if you will. And you can see there is a fair amount of particulate in there. probably little tiny pieces of crank seal. So we'll get that cleaned up, and then we'll install our oil pump, and then we'll be able to move on to the crankshafts. Now, I've cleaned the two mounting bolts for that oil pump with a degreaser and some alcohol. I've also made sure that the threads inside are perfectly clean so that I can apply a little bit of Loctite to these. They are very important. You don't want them coming out. Another thing is the seal. Don't lose this seal. It doesn't come in the gasket kit or the seal kit. Make sure it goes back in, otherwise you won't have enough pressure where the oil is going into the clutch shaft. Little bit of grease will hold that seal in place while you install your pump. Just like that. Don't put a gob of grease in there. Just a little grease, a little dab will do ya. All right? And I think that's it. We'll move on to the crank video next, and I'll talk to you in a while.
Say sweet things to me.